How many times have you started gaining phase, promising yourself you're gonna keep it lean, but then a couple weeks into the process and you're seeing the scales very, very slowly move and decide it's not happening quick enough, we need to push the calories. All of a sudden, you're into dirty bulk once again. You're eating everything in sight, Domino's is on speed dial, and within 2 months, your belly's getting bigger, but your arms have stayed around the same size. You fucked it again. And naturally, what you should do now is do a mini cut, like you've always done. And now we're back into that yo-yo cutting bulking cycle, which you repeat every couple of months, that leads to the exact same physique every single time. If this cycle sounds familiar, this is what I like to call the bulking cycle of doom. Most people fail when it does come to their gaining phases. And this is quite often because they're either focusing on the wrong metrics, they're trying to keep themselves too lean, or focusing on keeping themselves too lean ends up with them not being patient enough, and then all of a sudden they go the other way and start to dirty bulk. In this video, I'm going to go through the exact framework that I use with my one-to-one clients to help them break this cycle so that they have their gaining phases last longer and as a result, build more muscle in the process. You're going to learn how to set up a surplus, what metrics should we actually track, and how to stay lean enough for a 6, 12, even 18-month gaining cycle without turning into a fat mess. So it's important that we address the elephant in the room. You are more afraid of gaining fat than you are of staying the same size forever. Gaining muscle is a process that is going to require that you go through some uncomfortable parts before you get to that goal. The exact same way if you're going through a dieting phase, you're going to have the days where hunger is really high and you need to stick to your calories. Or you have very low energy, but you need to go out and do your steps. Or your motivation is low and you need to go and train. When it does come to gaining muscle, you are going to have low appetite and still need to eat your calories. You're going to have days where you hate how you look, you maybe think you look a little bit softer, and you need to just continue sticking to the plan. But you're also going to have to accept that you're going to get a little bit softer. Because if you don't accept that you're going to gain some body fat, it is going to be a never-ending struggle for you to actually get the physique you want. Gaining body fat in a gaining phase is the cost of doing business. Now, because some people are going to be so hesitant to gaining some body fat during this phase, they're going to go with a calorie surplus that's almost pointless. They're going to go with something like 100 calories of a surplus, or you're going to have these people who are going to try to build muscle and maintenance, right? And not to say that that isn't possible, but quite often when these people go through a couple months of following this 100 calorie surplus or even training at maintenance, they're looking at their physique and they're maybe not seeing a huge amount of change. Maybe not seeing a huge amount of change in the gym. They're not seeing big improvements to performance. And the scale weight has pretty much said the exact same thing. Now, if you spent 2 to 3 months trying to keep it really, really strict here with this very small surplus, and you're seeing very little change in the scales, very little change in your visuals, and next to no improvements in the gym, you might have a tendency now to swing the opposite direction and say, you know what, this lean gaining stuff, it's not working. I need to push harder. I need to go back to the dirty bulk. And all of a sudden you're back eating pizza every single weekend, you're not tracking, and you're just thinking about, I just need to eat as much as I can. And before you know it, it's time to diet again. The exact same thing that happened the last time. You pushed it way too far, you got too fat too quickly, all because you're trying to keep it way too lean at the very start. The answer is in the middle ground. You can keep yourself lean through a gaining phase, but it's better to accept that you're gonna gain some body fat, because trying to avoid fat gain at all costs is going to have you in a position where you're always on the defense and you're maybe trying to adhere to more rigid standards than is likely needed for a long-term gaining phase. The goal isn't to avoid fat gain entirely, it's to try to manage the rate of gain so that you gain at appropriate pace so you can actually detect changes but not gain so fast that you end up just having a mini cut every couple of weeks. Now that you've accepted that you're going to gain some body fat during your gaining phase, you need to ask yourself, well, how long am I going to have the phase last? And I do think it's important to have a minimum framework of about 4 months. And this is generally because building muscle, it's an energy expensive process. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of sets and reps to actually get enough muscle mass on your frame for it to actually look noticeable by the time you cut down the next time. And one framework I like to use with a lot of clients is this 4-to-1 framework. So for every 4 months of surplus, they get 1 month of dieting. Now, this is also a good litmus test of is the rate of gain appropriate? Because if it takes longer than that 1 month to diet off 4 months worth of fat accumulation, well, you know that that surplus is probably a little bit too high. And one reason why this 4-to-1 works so well is because, well, yeah, you can absolutely diet off 4 months worth of body fat within 1 month. You simply can't gain 4 months of muscle tissue in 1 month. It's just not gonna happen because we can't force muscle gain by just force feeding ourselves. It has to come through progressive overload within the gym, alongside the nutrition to support that. Whereas we can essentially starve out body fat. And a common issue I see with a lot of guys is they're not even making it to that 4 months. They might be making it to 2, maybe to 3. And no matter how much you eat, no matter how much you train within that 2 to 3 months, unless you're taking something like steroids, you're not really going to see a appreciable amount of muscle mass being gained within that time frame. So it's important that you do have it last long enough. And that's why this 4-to-1 ratio can scale quite well. You can either do 4 months and then 1 month of diet, you do 8 months and then 2 months of diet, or you do a whole year and then do a big 3-month cut. Obviously, the longer you give yourself, the more muscle you're likely going to gain. One area that you've likely given way too much credence over the years when it does come to your gaining phases is what the scale says. Now, the scales are important, but they're not the only thing that we should be looking at and managing, because our scale weight is going to fluctuate based on the sodium content of our diet, carbohydrates, hydration status, bowel movements, and different variables. And if we're always reacting to what the scale says, especially if it's on a day-to-day basis and you're cutting and increasing calories, it can get really confusing really fast, and all of a sudden you haven't gotten anywhere closer to your goal. So what I prefer to look at with clients is look at 4-week trends of how your body weight is increasing and look to see what the average rate of change is across 4 weeks, but also looking at how's training performance going. Are we seeing notable increases to our main compound movements, to isolation movements? Are we hitting any PBs? Because that's signaling that we're actually recovering effectively and we're seeing changes from an adaptation perspective within the muscle, within our strength capacity, or whatever that's going to relate towards more muscle coming onto our frame. We can also take circumference measurements. If we can look at the likes of our waist measurements alongside our limb measurements and see that our limbs are going up and our waist is staying pretty much the same, we can pretty damn sure that we're putting on good quality muscle tissue. But if we see that our waist is increasing faster than the likes of our limbs, we know we might be kind of pushing the surplus a little bit too fast, or maybe your training is just not effective. And most importantly, you're here for a look. So why not track that through pictures? And it's something I tell clients to do over and over again, is when you're taking your physique pictures, take them in the same lighting every single week, and we'll track those changes across 4-week time periods, so it's enough for us to actually track the true change, but also take them in bodybuilding poses, so you can actually display the muscularity that you're trying to build. So rather than just putting all our eggs in the basket of body weight and having that to influence our actions and our decision making, let's take a broader view and actually manage metrics that matter. Training performance, how big your limbs are getting and how small your waist is staying, and what the physique is actually looking like. Now let's talk about the actual numbers to optimize muscle gain while limiting fat gain. And it's important to keep in mind that where you are within your own journey, and this is based off how developed you are from muscle mass perspective, your rate of gain targets are going to be slightly different. So if we're looking at somebody who's a beginner, they're in their first couple of months to even their first year of training, they likely have a very high ceiling for how much muscle mass that they can be putting on right now. So with that, they can go at faster rates of gain without having as much of a fast rate of fat gain as somebody who's more advanced with the same rate of gain target. And this is why they can typically gain body weight at a faster rate while limiting fat gain. So the person who's in their first 6 months to a year of the gym, they can realistically aim for about 1.5 to 2% of total body weight increase per month. So if you're 80 kilograms, for example, you might even see nearly half a kilo change on a scale on a week-to-week basis for that first year. And this will usually correlate to a surplus of around 450 to 550 calories per day. But if you're a couple of years deep and you've built a bit of size, you're definitely not advanced, but you can see that you've definitely made a lot more progress since you were a beginner. Well, you might be in that intermediate stage where now the rate of gain has to slow down. And now you're maybe training closer to that 1% of total body weight per month. So versus at the start where you're gaining like nearly 400 grams of body weight per week, now you're looking to gain 400 grams every 2 weeks and 800 grams across the calendar month, assuming you're starting around 80 kilos. And this might just relate itself to about a 200 to 300 calorie surplus now versus that 500 calorie surplus you used in the early days. And now as you get closer and closer to that genetic ceiling, you are going to have a very slow rate of gain target to the point that it almost won't be detectable by your weighing scales. So if you think about the person who is 80 kilograms and they're an advanced lifter and they're aiming for a 0.5% rate of gain per month, that's 400 grams across the month. That's 100 grams per week. You won't even really be able to see that from the scale perspective. So you need to look at that over a longer time scale. But let's be real, if you're an advanced lifter and you're gaining at that rate, you're probably not watching these videos. You don't need to. You already know that the process is going to be quite slow for you. Now that you understand what type of surplus is going to be most effective for you and your experience level, you need to ask yourself, well, how am I going to make up that surplus? Now, with the likes of your protein intake, where there's diet phase, gaining phase, you're going to keep your protein relatively similar. It's typically going to fall between this 1.6 to 2.2 gram range. And that can be just based upon your preference, because we know that even at 1.6, we can see muscle mass adaptations are going to be maximized from that. And going beyond that might just have beneficial effects from the likes of managing satiety, or even just could be in line with your preferences. But anything after 1.6 is kind of profit. Now, if you want to go full optimization with the likes of the protein, you could look to also spread this across 3 to 5 meals across the day and spacing the meals about 3 to 4 hours apart. And this could potentially just help us to maximize muscle protein synthesis more often throughout the day. But again, the most important thing is just getting the protein in full stop. So after you've calculated your protein, now you're going to calculate your fat intake. Fat intake is going to be about 25 to 40% of your total calories. And fat is just helping provide us with another substrate of energy, helping support hormonal function, but also it's helping keep our food nice and tasty and regulate our appetite. Because a lot of people find if they just go way too high in carbohydrates, keep fat way too low, they might find that they just don't get as much enjoyment out of the diet. So it is important that we do keep some fat in there just for overall palatability and enjoyment of the diet over the long term. Because if the diet is not enjoyable, the diet won't be sustainable and you're not going to be able to stick within the surplus for too long. And when it does come to the sources that we're going to pick for our fat, we want to try to pick as little shitty processed foods as possible and biasing more towards the likes of plant-based sources, our nuts, our seeds, our seed oils, and shying away from having too much animal-based fats, butters, really fatty cuts of meat. It's not to say that we can't have them within the diet, it's just that we do want to limit them for our overall health long term. And once you've calculated your protein alongside your fats, whatever calories are remaining, use those for carbs. Carbohydrates are going to be our primary fuel source to use when we're training. They're helping us fill our muscles up with glycogen, and they're going to be the best way for you to gain the most amount of muscle possible from a nutritional side of things throughout this gain phase. Protein is the building blocks, fats to support the hormone, carbohydrates to support the training performance. When training performance is supported, it actually gives us something to recover from because we're going to be performing to a high level, which is needed to actually pack on size. Now, for some of you, your problem is not that you have gained too much body fat too quickly in prior gaining phases, it's that you have not gained anything at all. You might consider yourself to be a hard gainer, a special snowflake that is seemingly incapable of gaining body weight. And I'm here to tell you that you're just using the incorrect methods. A lot of people will go towards some bog standard calorie calculator that just spits out an equation that is going to suit the average individual, but it's not unique to the individual. Now, what you need, and it's something I do with all my clients, to find their specific calorie amounts is going to be used to observe method. So what we'll do is we'll track your body weight and your calories for 2 weeks. After the first week, we'll keep the calories fixed into week 2. And then we're going to compare the body weight difference between week 1 to week 2. And if we notice that your body weight has actually reduced from week 1 to week 2, then we might decide, okay, let's go with a 5 to 10% increase. Obviously, the greater the difference is between 1 week to the next, we're going to go with a different side of that 5 or 10. So if, for example, this guy came to me and he lost 100 grams from 1 week to the next, I'd say, let's just bump up your calories by about 5%. If he came back to me and he was in the 70s, he was in 79.5, well, then we'd probably bump it up by 10. And then we'll track again. So it's a case of just always trying to use the data to help us back up, are we actually moving in the right direction? Versus just using some random calculator and assuming that that's going to be the answer. We need to back up our decisions with data. And it's quite often the people who are hard gainers are simply just not tracking the data that they need to. And even if you are tracking data and you're just finding it harder to actually going to get in the calories that you need, after you've done all this method, well, you could just lean into things that we recommend people not do if they're trying to lose body weight. So somebody who's trying to lose body weight, something I wouldn't recommend to do is drink a lot of their calories. Maybe it's a good idea for you to have a glass of juice with each meal, or maybe bring that chocolate milk back in. You can start eating softer, more energy dense foods, because soft foods require less chewing, you're going to eat them quicker, and that impacts your hunger signals a lot slower than if you're to eat harder foods. You could snack frequently, because if you add on a snack to the end of each meal, Just by changing up the taste profile, the palatability, the texture of the meal, you're going to be able to easily add in additional calories by leveraging the buffet effect. You could also engage in some mindless eating. Think about when you go to the cinema and how quickly you go through a bag of popcorn because you're distracted, you're watching the screen. Well, that's something we can do here. Watch TV, keep yourself distracted while you're actually eating, and that will help you have the meal go down a lot quicker. And that is going to allow you to eat more calories in across the day without feeling too full. And a very low hanging fruit is set meal alarms. You have to eat like it's your job when it does come to gaining muscle at certain points, especially if you're a hard gainer. You can't miss meals. If you miss meals, you are going to ultimately not be able to adhere to that calorie surplus for a long enough period of time to get the muscle gain that you want. Not only does setting alarms for your meal times improve your digestion because you're not having too many big meals close together, but it also just improves your accuracy and your adherence towards the surplus. Because if you miss them, well, you're kind of missing the mark for that day. And of course, we can't round off a video on gaining muscle without talking about auditing our training and recovery. Now, I've made a whole video series called The Pragmatic Guide to Building Muscle, which talks about how to program for muscle gain, which you can find up here if you want to know more about the specifics of programming for muscle building. But ultimately, training is the signal. It doesn't matter how well you have your diet set up. It doesn't matter how well you're adhering to your rate of gain. It doesn't matter how well you have your phases laid out if your training is not hard and sufficient enough to actually drive the stimulus for muscle growth. We want to ensure that our programming is specific enough to drive attention towards the target muscles that we want to bring up. We want to ensure that we have enough volume and intensity within our programming that's going to actually be effective. But then to support that, we need to make sure our nutrition is in place, but sleep also. If you're sleeping less than 7 to 8 hours per night and you're going through a gaining phase and your stress is really high, you're ultimately going to be shortchanging yourself. And that's ultimately going to show in your training performance within the gym. And that will then show in how much you gain throughout your gaining cycle. All of this is interlinked. And even how fast you gain can be linked to how you perform in the gym. Up to a certain point, you'll notice that even if you gain quite quick, you will still perform quite well. But you'll get to a point where body fat accumulates so fast that you actually feel more lethargic when you get into the gym. And training performance is not actually improving relative to how much body fat you're putting on. So it's trying to find that sweet spot, that middle ground of how fast a rate of gain actually allows for better training performance week to week, getting to a body weight that actually provides you with perfect recovery and a perfect scenario to actually gain muscle, and having all your recovery variables, your sleep, your stress, your nutrition, all aligned towards this muscle building goal. And I want to just wrap up this video by saying that your ideal physique is unlikely to be one gaining phase away. It's likely to be many of these gaining phases stacked on top of each other and done very well. It's expected that you're going to make some obvious mistakes at the beginning, but the aim should be that you make less and less of them over time. And hopefully this video has went a long way towards helping you overcome or not even get to the point of experiencing any of those unwanted, unhelpful scenarios. And if you want a play-by-play of everything I've went through in this video, you can just go into the description and you'll get a free copy of my gaining phase optimization guide. And if you want more than a guide and you want some one-to-one help, that's exactly what I do with all my clients. A lot of the things that we covered in today's video are parts of the gaining phase process that I help my clients overcome and avoid the mistakes before they even happen. So if you're tired of spinning your wheels, doing this yo-yo cutting bulking cycle, and you actually want to put on mass that lasts and have the accountability in your corner so you can master the likes of the weekends, master your trips away while still staying true to your muscle building goals, well, that's where my coaching service comes in. So you can apply through any of the links in the description below, chat to me on WhatsApp, and let's have you put on actual size for once and for all. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like it, comment, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll chat to you in the next one.